Thanks for having me. I wanted to share with you guys a little bit of the, Brex. Even though it seems it was really fast in under 2 years, we grew a lot. I've been trying to do this, building startups thing for a long time now, and over the last, I'd say, 10 years or so, there was a lot of learning. So I wanted to tell you guys, not only about Brex, but the story of how we started back then and got here. And actually, my story started when I was around 12 years old, actually, because there was this game I wanted to play, and it was a paid game. And I went to ask my parents, like, hey, can you pay the subscription thing for me? And they said no. And they had this free trial, and I was completely addicted to the game. So I Googled, and I figured out if I learned how to code, I could play it for free. I basically went on Google and started learning, how to code, and was able to create kind of like a pirate version of that game that started getting super popular in Brazil. And instead of charging the subscription fee that the original game was charging, I started selling kind of like items inside the game, which turns out today we all know it's a much better business. And what happened was it got super popular in Brazil, and all my friends plus all their friends and friends of friends were playing it. But after 2 years, I got this legal notification saying I was breaking some sort of patents. I didn't know what patents were at the time, but my mom got super upset and told me to shut everything off. And that was, I would say, kind of like my first entrepreneurial experience because, I think at that time, after 2 years, the game had sold something like $100,000 or something, which in Brazil is a lot, and for a 14-year-old at the time was infinite amount of money. I could buy like everything I wanted. And I think the lessons there are we had something that we knew already worked, and we made it free. So that's usually works. So, but it was illegal. So illegal businesses, they're very good at generating money, but they end at some point because it's illegal. So that was a good lesson. But I was 14 at that time, and I was having this kind of like 14-year-old crisis. I didn't know what to do with my life because I spent these 2 years kind of like just doing that. And then I started doing some normal stuff. So I don't know, I found a girlfriend, I started playing sports, watching TV shows, like all that normal stuff. And there was this TV show called Chuck. I don't know if any of you have seen that TV show, but it's this really cool spy hacker and programmer. And he had gone to Stanford. I don't know if I should say this here, but and he had this awesome life, and I was like, I kind of want to be like that guy. He seems really cool. So I decided, hey, I want to go to Stanford. And how many of you here are not born in the U.S.? So quite a few. So as you all know, for international students, this whole U.S. application process is kind of like a weird thing, right? Like there's SATs and essays, and you have to get recommendation letters. I don't think my teachers even knew who I was. And it's kind of like this complicated process that I didn't understand much. But I found this Brazilian dude. I don't know if I mentioned, I was born and raised in Brazil, so that's an important fact to mention. So I found this Brazilian dude that he was graduating from Stanford, and he was basically starting this ticketing company in Brazil that was like Eventbrite in Brazil. And he was starting it out, and we made this deal in which I would code for him for free. In exchange, he would teach me the Stanford application process. So I got a job. Let's call it a job. And it was a really cool experience because he hired a bunch of like senior engineers, raised a lot of money, and those guys taught me a lot. It was like this cool experience. And the company was doing really well. But after a year, I thought he was a very smart guy, and I kind of wanted to do what he was doing. He was having like this awesome life, and I didn't know that it wasn't awesome at the time, just seemed awesome from the outside. So I decided to try to start my own company. And this was the first company I tried to start. It was, I had learned the Stanford application process. I was like, okay, I'll put this online, and see if people are willing to do anything. So we created this website that helped Brazilian students with the US application process. And I think, during the startup, there was a lot of very, valuable lessons. The first thing is that we got a lot of press. So we got a lot of newspapers writing about us. I think we got it for a few reasons. One, we were very young at the time, so it's, me and my friends were all 15 or so. And then Brazil was having this scholarship program, and that was pretty new, and we were teaching, students how to study in the US. And press actually drove a lot of visits and a lot of signups and a lot of users. And when we started getting a lot of users, we were like, boom, this is the new Facebook, right? It turns out it wasn't, but it kind of made the importance of two things we realized is one, engagement, which is even though you get a lot of signups, you need people to be coming every day or every week to your website or to your app or to whatever you're doing, right? And the second thing was that monetization. So after a year, this company failed miserably, and I had invested most of my money, into this thing. But this company failed miserably because we couldn't monetize it. We could not generate any kind of revenue, and the students didn't have any money to pay, the high school students, and the parents didn't believe that their kids would study in the US. So, the parents wouldn't pay either. So, we couldn't monetize the whole thing. And then it failed. But the other thing we learned is that, by getting a lot of press with that thing, it opened a lot of doors for us. We got to meet a lot of people that we never would have met. So even though it was kind of a failure, it was kind of a success in the sense of we got to know a lot of people in this startup environment, understanding, things that you guys are learning today. What is an MVP? How to get a product? And all these things. So just even if it didn't work, just the fact that we tried, we learned a bunch during the process. But at this point, I was having these fights with my mom. She didn't like, this entrepreneurship thing too much. And I was pitching her I wasn't going to college anymore at that point. So she wasn't very happy about that. So, we had these huge fights. I had to get emancipated. It was, this whole drama. And then I kind of moved out of my house, started living by myself. And, this was end of junior year of high school. So, I was having some cash problems because I, invested most of my money into that company. So there was this hackathon happening in Miami that was worth $50,000. And I was like, oh yeah, if I can win this thing, it's more time without going back to my mom. So I went there with two friends and we built this app called Ask Me Out. This was end of 2012. And it was basically like Tinder, but instead of geolocation, it was Facebook friends. You could like and match your Facebook friends. So we did that. And turned out, we won the thing, came back to Brazil, and it was hey, maybe we launched this. Maybe this is a new Snapchat or something, right? It wasn't. But, that's kind of how I first got into payments because basically, we had this behavior that guys were very unselective and just clicked on every single person. And we had to, try to fix that, and we added payment to see if people would be more selective, right? So that's kind of how we got into payments. We had this horrible experience, basically, implementing these payment systems. They held our money. They required a bunch of documents, very, very shitty experience. And that's around the time that my co-founder, who has, you guys should invite him at some point, but he has a really cool story, and he was also a programmer. And we basically met over Twitter, basically because when you're a programmer, there's this thing which is the text editor that you use to code. And I used one called Vim. He used one called Emacs. And we started fighting on Twitter to see which one was better. I won, he lost. So, but anyway, it got complicated to argue over 140 characters. We went to Skype. And on Skype, we became really good friends and, decided to do something together. So, I think that was just kind of lucky, but we just became really good friends over Skype and decided to start a company, even I think before we met in person. And I'm the same co-founder since then, so it worked out. But I do not recommend this strategy. So, we decided to start this payments business down in Brazil because he had worked at a payments business while he was a teenager. I had this bad experience with payments. So, we decided to start this payments business in Brazil that was like, that was what Stripe is here, but in Brazil. And I think I want to focus a lot of the learnings that I had in that business because without having built that business, I wouldn't have been able to build Brex. And Brex, we already knew a lot what to do. That's why it went so fast. But in that business, we had no fucking clue what we were doing. So, I think that, and then there were a few learnings, right? So we started in the beginning of 2013. We sold it in September 2016. So we went this phase from 0 to around 150 people. That was kind of like the stage that we sold it. And I think the first thing that was very interesting about building a business in Brazil, which is not true here in the Valley, but it was actually very helpful, is that we only raised something like $300,000, and that was the entire amount of money that we raised for the business. So that forced us into being profitable really early on. And by having this obsession with profits, it forced us into product market fit. So, I think that the first idea we had was, hey, let's build, the set of beautiful APIs that developers can use to, build better stuff. And that was our initial thesis. Turns out, that in Brazil, developers are not the ones making the decisions. Like, they're not the ones that, like Stripe here in the US, they're not the ones that are deciding which payment method is going to be used because, there's not a lot of startups there. Most of the online market is basically online e-commerce, so people who had physical stores and now are selling online. So that was our first assumption of what the initial product would be, and it was very wrong. Like, the developers liked our APIs, but no one else cared. And the thing that we found out about SMBs with that was, small business owners, so if any of you are thinking about building something for SMBs, they mostly care about two things. You're either going to increase their revenue or you're going to reduce their cost. All these operational efficiencies and stuff like that, like, you can make an argument that might be good, might be bad, but, the most successful companies selling to SMBs either increase their revenue or reduce their costs, right? And what we did is that instead of trying to pitch them and how easy were our APIs, we created very simple ways to increase their revenue. And this was kind of hacky, but it worked down there. So, one thing that happened with online merchants was that every 10 transactions that they sent, to process, only 6 or 7 were approved. So all of you probably had your card denied at some point in your life for some random reason, right? That happens online all the time, and these stores, they have these conversion rates, which is the amount of transactions that actually go in and the one that actually are approved. And we figured out that, we could increase that by doing this, insanely smart thing, which we would just retry it a bunch of times. So if it didn't work through, you keep sending it until it went through. Turns out the bank systems is so old and legacy and that worked, and we got them a higher kind of approval rate. Obviously at the time we didn't tell anyone that's what we were doing, but we would sell it as like, hey, if you move from whatever you are to Pagarme, you'll increase your revenue because you're going to reduce the amount of transactions that were declined, and therefore it's worth to pay us this because this is your ROI, right? So having this obsession about either increases the merchant's revenue or reducing their cost, and very, very focused on profitability, made us be able to get to product market fit kind of fast and not be stuck in this phase, between 0 and product market fit that you don't know if it's working or not working, you're burning through cash. And I think if we had started this business in the US, we probably, because we would have been able to raise a lot more money, we probably wouldn't be as focused, on being profitable, and that would have delayed product market fit, and who knows what would have happened. But because we were so focused, we got there. The trade-off with that was we were so focused on, kind of short-term profits and short-term, paying the bills of each month that we didn't do any long-term investments. So we didn't do anything that might be bad for the short term, but good on the longer term. So we may have missed some market opportunities that we could have gotten because of that. So that was one. And I would say that the main thing that we probably missed by being more short-term focused is that we probably lost great people because we didn't want to pay what their market worth was. So if there was someone and they were making like a salary above what we were paying the other people, we would not hire them. Versus, the right thing to do on long term is, if you're paying your people below market and now you can afford to pay people better, just put everyone's salary up and, hire the person that you want. Don't let, wages or whatever that is prevent you from hiring great people. I think that was one of the mistakes that we did, in that company. But for that company, it was good. It was like we were in survival mode. Like each month, I remember this month where we had to call all our suppliers and say, hey, we're not going to pay you this month because, some big customer delayed their payment. So, it's kind of a tough spot. But, it was a very good school around what to do and like how to get to product market fit, right? So that was like, the first experience. And then after you achieve product market fit, you have a whole other set of problems because, everything that worked when you were small starts breaking, right? So, your customer support starts sucking because, you don't have enough people there. Your system starts, failing and people start finding bugs that you never thought of. You start getting all these other problems, but they're not like existential problems. So they're like, not as bad. The worst part is, between 0 and you finding product market fit and all of that. That's like, a terrible part of the life. But, I think that the lessons there was focus on very strong pain points, like things that optimize their flow a little bit or like, they do this little thing for you. It wasn't like a real pain. So it was harder to get them excited about versus, focusing on increasing their revenue or reducing their costs. And reducing their costs is not making an employee spend 20 minutes a day less doing something. Because, they're not going to fire their employee because of that. Reducing the cost is actually like somehow they used to pay for something and now they don't pay anymore for something, right? So that's, I think the two big lessons. So what happened after 3.5 years, the company was doing super well. We were doing like, as you said, $1.5 billion in transaction volume. And, we had got into college, into Stanford, and we were like, okay. And we tried to defer. They said no. So we kind of had, this thing that we kind of had to choose. And, a few things happened. The reason we decided to sell it was, one, we thought when you're building something for a local country, it can be something big, but it's very unlikely that it will be massive. Right? There's very few cases of a startup that started in one country, only serves that country, and became, tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars, right? So, we were always very ambitious, so we wanted to build something like much larger. So that was point number one. We thought Pagarami could be a big business, but it couldn't be a massive business. And if you're gonna, invest your life working on something, it's, it needs to be something you're passionate about, and ideally something really big as well. So we decided to, that was one of the reasons. The second reason was, this is kind of more short term. We didn't have any money personally. We were kind of like, we still had startup salaries in the end because, we couldn't raise our salary because otherwise we had to raise everybody else's salary and we didn't have money to do that because we were profitable. So we didn't have any money. So we were very kind of like liquidity craving. Like all my entrepreneur friends have a lot of money and they were doing all these awesome things and we didn't have any. So, we wanted that kind of like liquidity, and we wanted, to do that. So that was the second reason that made us sell, which is the reason to actually make a lot of founders sell, because, it kind of sucks. And then the third thing was we kind of wanted to check school out and see, how it was. It seemed fun from the movies, so, we wanted to see how it was. So we sold the company and came to Stanford. That was 2016. So, we got there, and it was, a fun kind of like 3-month experience. But then we decided we wanted to start another company. So we didn't last very long. And then we were tired of payments. We said, hey, there's, no way I'm doing payments again. These stupid banks, like, they don't know anything. And it's a pain in the ass. Like, there's all these regulatory stuff. We're going to do something that's in the bleeding edge of technology. So we decided to do a VR company. And VR is really hard. So we got into YC, like Y-Combinator, with this VR idea. And, the idea wasn't great, but, we had a cool, we're second-time founders, so, it was kind of easier to get in because of that. So we got into YC with, this VR idea. And inside YC, we were like, okay, we have no clue how to actually, like, do this. So, we kind of gave up on the idea. And then we started this process of like, hey, what do we work on, right? Like, we have some experience. We, like, raising money wasn't the issue. We could probably raise money to whatever we wanted to do because, we had money and, we had met a lot of people during Programme. So, but what do we work on? What do we spend the next 10, 20 years of our life, working on? And we went through a bunch of ideas. And, we went through an idea to build a Bloomberg competitor. And then we went through an idea to build a distributed, hard AI processing that, would process in everyone's phones while they're idle. We went through a bunch of ideas. And in the end, like, the best advice I got around actually finding an idea was someone, actually my roommate told me this. And he said, hey, Henrique, and he was an investor. The best, founders are those who have an unfair advantage about a problem they're working on. And that unfair advantage comes from, either some experience that they had, and honestly, being from a country and building something for that country that counts. Or, the timing of the world is a specific place where they have kind of like this first mover advantage, and they personally have that problem, so they understand that problem really well, right? And, for us, and he said that's why, most people, and this is, an advice that, people give in general, which is like, hey, you should find an idea for your own problems. And that's why a lot of times people in college, no offense to any of you guys, but they have very bad ideas, is because, the problems in college are, not that big. Sometimes they show up, like DoorDash was kind of that, hey, I want to order food to my, campus dorm. But a lot of the times the big unsolved problems are in these random areas that you never thought of, right? Maybe it's, the oil and gas industry. Maybe it's in FinTech like us, or, whatever the area that, you by some reason never had exposure to. That's where a lot of the, the big unsolved problems are still there, right? So, we thought about it and it was like, okay, so what unfair advantage do we have? Like, what are we good at? Turns out we knew a lot about FinTech, right? We're doing this payments business in Brazil. We learned a lot about how all these things work. So we decided to, do something in FinTech. And, and then we were at YC and we saw like all these companies that they had, raised a bunch of money, like literally millions of dollars, and they couldn't get a credit card. And we thought that was really dumb. Like, if I had like millions of dollars in my bank account, why can't I get not a credit card, right? Like, it just seems stupid. And that's kind of the problem that we decided to tackle. It's like, okay, let's start, by working towards that. And that's kind of how we got started in idea. And YC helped us a lot with this, so I super recommend that. But like kind of thinking through the idea and like validating it. But then the next thing that we found out was that everyone told us that it takes 2 years to get a credit card out the market. So it turns out this was not the reason no one had solved this problem. It was just because it was there was a barrier of entry to the market. There was a, starting, like issuing a credit card was not a simple task. It's not like anyone could go, oh, I'm going to issue a credit card, and start doing it. There's actually a lot of regulatory stuff and like a lot of funding stuff that you need to solve. And we knew that because we had, this FinTech experience, we were in a unique position to actually start that business. And we could get through these initial hurdles and these initial challenges. And that's why we did. And because it was very hard to start, it was very hard for other people to start, right? So, if any other smart kid decided to start with this, they would have a tough time versus, it's easier to create, something that's just online. There's no regulatory, no financial implication or stuff like that. So that's when we decided to start Brex. So a little bit about what we do. We do corporate credit cards. In the initial market that we started serving is startups. Our value proposition is we give people a corporate credit card with 10 times higher limits, no personal guarantee, and you can go from 0 to a working card in 5 minutes. So if any of you got a credit card personally, that's not exactly how it works. You have all these random forms you have to fill. You get a very low limit, especially when you're starting out, and it takes forever, right? And same thing in business cards, but worse. So that. And then the second thing that we realized was that we were good in engineering, and all these banks are like pretty bad. So we decided to, rebuild the entire technology stack from scratch. And that was a very tough decision because we were like, okay, this will take a lot more time than using someone that's, already did this. So building this will take a lot more time. Is it worth it or not? Is it worth it to put in the hands of people, start testing it out and getting feedback? Or is it worth spending 2 years building this thing? So it turns out we find a way of doing both. So what we did is that we found a vendor that could help us get started, and we created this hack that our first versions of our card, back there, and it was a prepaid card that we actually, so it seemed like a credit card, but it was actually a prepaid card that we put the money in first, for people, and then whatever they spend we charged them, right? So that was kind of the model because it was way harder to get a credit card than a prepaid card. So that was kind of our hack to start it out. So we started getting that out, but at the same time, building this immense system that we would have to do actually credit card processing. Best thing that we did this both at the same time. It was the best thing we did. And then but we took a while to launch. We only launched, it was June last year. So, it's going to be 9 months now into March. But before launching, we already had probably over, I don't know how many, but a lot of customers, already using Brex on the older model. And we kept building and testing and stuff like that. But, in FinTech, I don't know if any of you want to do something in FinTech, the thing I recommend the most is finding a way that in the short term you can own the entire stack and own the entire experience. Because if you depend on a partner, on a bank or something like that, at some time you're going to get screwed. So that's kind of how we started out. And turned out, when we launched in June, it just, it grew really fast because we were testing out a product for a while. But the other thing about our product, which is a little bit different, was, we knew people needed a credit card. You're starting a business, you need a credit card because you need to pay for stuff. The only thing is we needed to do a card that was better than the other cards. It's easier in the sense that, you don't need to figure it out if people actually need that because everyone gets a credit card. You just need to figure out if yours is better than the other. We prefer the challenge of execution challenge, which is, we probably can build this better than other people, so we're not going to take this product market fit risk. Versus on new markets, you're sometimes creating something. So even if the product's not great because no one ever created it, it goes really fast, right? So we grew a lot. Today, we're around a little bit over 100 people. The beginning of last year, we're probably 10 people. So it grew really fast. We raised a little bit over $200 million. And that is the story. So happy to take questions or moderate now.
Amazing keynote speech. Before entering the official Q&A session, we will have a small activity, 3-round activity with Henrique. So would you mind taking a seat? So one of the goals of today's course is to get you thinking about what are some ideas that you want to focus for this whole semester. What are some problems that you think are not solved in our society? What are some products you always want to have, but then it doesn't exist? So during the last 20 minutes of our today's lecture, you will be pitching about your group's startup ideas. And before that, we will look into the story of Brex and some of the most amazing and most successful unicorns. For the activity, we will have 3 rounds. Each round will have 3 brief stories, and one of them is about Brex. So the first round is about the childhood stories. Let's look at founder 1. Quote, I helped fix windmills, vaccinate cattle, and do other chores. We also watch soap operas every afternoon. Founder 2 scored 1,590 out of 1,600 on the SAT. As a college student, he spent a lot of time on the computers, though he was not much interested in studying other subjects. Founder 3. At age 14, he had already built a successful online game, used the money he earned to start an educational startup helping Brazilian students with their college application. How many of you think founder 1 is Henrique? How many of you think founder 2 is? How about founder 3? How about all of the above? So it turns out the first one is Jeff Bezos from Amazon, and the second one is Bill Gates, and the third one is our keynote speaker here. So it makes me wonder that, like, since you started the startup at such a young age, did you always have something really big in mind? Did you always know that you wanted to start up in the future?
Well, I mean, I think since I told you guys that I worked for that startup, then I knew it was possible because I interacted with my boss, and I thought I could do it too. So I think since that time, I wanted to do a startup. And when you read about startups, you read about the biggest ones. I wanted to do something big, I think, from that age.
Did you never have to make the tough decision between like going to a big corporate to be an engineer and then versus starting your own?
No, I had to do the decision of do I go to school or not.
Because I believe a lot of us sitting here, it's almost the end of recruiting season for this year. So I guess a lot of you are making the decision between like going to a startup or going to a big corporation. Do you have like any suggestions for us?
I suggest you go to Brex.
Would you be opening for application after this?
Yes. So no, but jokes aside, I'm not going to argue between which company you should join, but between starting and joining a company, I would say if your ultimate goal is to start a company, joining a startup is riskier but is better because you'll only get the maximum benefits if the startup works. So you have your own risk plus the startup risk. Versus a big company, it's less good. There's a lot of people out of Google starting companies, kind of whatever. But it's more guaranteed that you'll do. So it depends a little bit on your risk appetite. I was always a big risk taker. So I would say between those two things. If you join a startup that is working or you think will work, it's probably better than a bigger company. But a startup that fails is not that great, right? But between starting a startup out of college, again, think about it. If you find an idea that you think that you as a founder have a unique perspective on, like a unique experience that makes you be the best founder to start a startup. That, you know, if another very smart kid from whatever other school decided to start the same startup, why would you win against them? And I would just ask myself that. And if the answer is probably not, maybe working somewhere will give you that unique, you know, experience or insight. That make sense?
Yeah. So, the second round. This is about the company's initial ideas, which is also relevant to our today's topic. Company 1. He cracked the plane he had bought for fun and was told replacement parts wouldn't be ready for months. He became really, really angry and he told his friends that they could build a better machine. Company 2. Two friends found it impossible to get corporate credit cards while building the startup, Harder, a payment processing company in Brazil. Company 3. He was a very forgetful student at MIT while the trouble of forgetting his USB too often haunted him. Finally, one day when he forgot his USB again on the Chinatown bus, he decided to change something. Well, this was an easy one. This was a very easy one, so you guys can all shout out the answers. Yeah. And the first company is actually Bowen. And the last one is actually the Dropbox that we use. It makes me curious that when you had this idea of building Brex, we all know that it's a very, very fast-growing company. When you initially had this idea, did you do some like systematic market research? How did you pinpoint the audience, and how did you pinpoint the need in the market?
So I was at YC. You know, all the other people couldn't get cars. That was kind of how we stumbled into it. But I think that we always thought about B2B financial services, right? Like we were serving B2B with financial services and Garmin and with Brex, so it was kind of natural for us to go in that direction a little bit. We did not do a thorough market research at the time we decided to start, but afterwards we did. Turns out it was great as well, but you know, it wasn't something we did in the beginning.
What were some of the biggest difficulties that you confronted through the process? Were you confronted by investors, other banks? What are some of the biggest difficulties?
Honestly, recruiting engineers is really tough in this place. So you know, we wanted to hire kind of some more senior engineers, you know, and we messaged them on LinkedIn, and they're like, "Who the fuck are you?" So you know, that was really tough. In the beginning, you know, people say recruit from your network. All my network were Stanford freshmen, so you know, wasn't that great of a pool. But you know, I think that was number one. Number two was actually getting a card working, and it's really hard. You know, a lot of things need to line up, like on the regulatory side, on the banking side, on the financial side. A lot of things need to kind of happen. You know, that was pretty tough.
So you also know that we, as a DeCal, our students are also going to pitch for ideas, going to do a startup deck. What would be some of the suggestions that you would give them when they're doing market research and when they're trying to find who is their target audience and is there actually the need in the market?
My suggestion on that is it's okay to start with a niche as long as the overall market is really, really big. So that said, you know, the example is like financial services, for example, is a gigantic market, and good company, they can always, you know, pivot into larger stuff within financial services. But it's really hard if you're doing, you know, cloud storage to go to financial services, right? Or to go, you know, to do that. So get a market that's generally really big, and then it's fine to find a niche and be the best at it. So transportation was big, but Uber started, you know, a black car service, or travel was big, but Airbnb started the whole, Air bed and breakfast mattress thing. So just go into like a very big industry, and your first niche doesn't need to be that big. Your first niche just needs to get you to, 10 million in revenue or something. But then you can try to figure out the second niche after.
As we build startups, we also know that like teams are very important. As you mentioned, you and your friends in Brazil decided to start up the business. What suggestions do you have for us as students if we want to start an idea and build our own team? And you could also like share about how you build the rest of your team in Brex.
I think that the first step is finding a co-founder. My advice on finding a co-founder is, I think the generic thing is I'm gonna find someone that has a skill set that's complementary to mine. So like I'm an engineer, I'm gonna find a designer, right? Or I'm a business guy, I'm gonna find an engineer. I think more important than that in the longer term is just someone that you truly trust, and that you put like. Me and my co-founder, I put our relationships most times above the business, like in terms of, priorities. And you can only do that with someone you truly trust. So I think that's number one. Two, the only exception to this is, there's no engineer in your co-founding team. It makes it really hard because you're always going to be depending on hiring engineers, and that's really hard. And three, try to always get people that are better than you, both on a co-founder or when you're hiring your first team. The way you should think about isn't like, hey, who should I hire? Who can I pay? Just think about people that you think are better than you and try to do whatever it takes to recruit them. And don't be greedy with equity. Like, at the end of the day, if this thing of whatever you guys build works really well, you won't know how to spend the money. I can guarantee you that. So, just pick people that will help you get there.
So, our third round. This is about growth. Company 1, in the first 2 months, is sold to all 50 states and more than 45 countries, averaging 20,000 per week. Today, it is the largest online retailer in the world. It is also in your homework for this week. Company 2, 2018. The 22-year-old founders announced a 125 million Series C for their second successful payments business at a 1.1 billion evaluation. By the time, the company is only 2 years old. Company 3, this is the history of their user growth. So, shout out the answer, which one is about Brex?
All the quizzes here in Berkeley this year.
Do you want to take a guess? Which one is company 1 and like who is company 3? I'll give a hint. Company 3 is software that you use every day.
Facebook?
Yeah, Facebook. And company 1 is Amazon. So we all know that your company is growing at a very fast speed. Would you like to share about like what are your future goals? Like probably like some vague future plannings for your company? Are you going to like also do credit cards for corporations, for like individuals?
Yeah, we're definitely expanding, outside of startups. Our goal is to be this global credit card platform that, powers every company in the world. So, hopefully someday wherever you go work, you're gonna, get into your job, you're gonna have your computer, you're gonna have, a t-shirt, and you're gonna have your Brex card.
Thank you so much.